You go down like that.
There we go. Thanks for reminding me, Sasha. Yes, as it happens, I have been studying climate change. Well, actually, since I was in grad school, this was in the 1970s, before most people were even aware of the possibility, although most physicists were quite aware of it. I mean, like 100 years ago. I built my first global climate model in 1976, I think it was. And then I've read the IPCC reports and read a lot of the scientific papers. It is interesting scientifically. It is frustrating that, I mean, the science is so clear and has been clear for 30 years, and yet we've somehow managed to put off doing anything about it. And basically, this has been to the benefit of old people like me who get to have cheap gasoline and cheap electricity, and you youngsters are gonna pay for it. So I actually wouldn't be surprised if at some point, when young people realize how badly they have been screwed by my generation, they will probably start, they'll have an old age tax. You're an old person, you were part of the problem, you're paying a higher tax, or we're cutting back your pensions.
Boomer tax. I love it. It's a good idea.
And in fact, it would certainly be fair to do so, because my generation has enjoyed enormous economic benefits from this, which your generation will have to pay. So it.
So sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Okay. I know that feeling when I have to go to the bathroom. So anyway, so let's get started on the. There you go. Everything fixed.
I was not expecting somebody knocking my door.
Oh,
and they just,
okay.
I'm so sorry.
No, I thought sure you had to go to the bathroom or something. Anyway, well then I will raise a topic that I have been worrying about for the last month. I wrote an essay on my website. I think it was entitled, "Have I Been Wasting My Time?" And you see, for years, I have been following a progression. I've been trying to teach the world about all these ideas, and I've been failing. And with each passing year, I think about why I'm not getting my ideas through to people. And I get more and more abstract in thinking about the nature of the problem. And so I had this idea that it would be perhaps due to this problem of object versus process, and I just need to teach that. Well, the thought that occurred to me about 3 weeks ago was that it actually arose from the realization that I can never remember people's names, all sorts of facts I cannot remember. And in fact, it occurred after further thought, I realized that I actually have extremely good memory for some things. For example, what was his name? I can't remember his name. The Cossack leader around 1650 or so, who led a revolt against the Russian regime, was betrayed after he led an overly ambitious attack that failed. He was betrayed and turned over to the Russian leaders, who then executed him with great brutality. Boy, I remember all about that. Oh yeah, his name was Stinker Razin. I remember that name because it's such a striking name. I mean, how'd you like to be called? Stinker. So anyway, so I can remember some things with extreme clarity. But on the other hand, I can't remember lots of names. And I realized that the reason for this has to do with the way my memory works. It is that I have a very process-intensive approach to my mind is very process-intensive. And so I can remember all sorts of stuff that is part of my appreciation of the process of the system of reality. I remember Stinka Razin because that tells me something about the nature of politics and human loyalty and brutality. It all fits into a picture of humanity. On the other hand, I could not remember a name like Nas Akul because it doesn't fit into any process. There's no formula that can lead me to that. It simply has to be memorized. Nas Akul, Nas Akul, Nas Akul, over and over, and eventually I can remember it. That's the only way. And yet my thinking process simply doesn't do that. So I can't remember names, but I can remember things associated with processes. And there's an enormous amount of stuff that is packed in here, but it's all connected in a system of thought. Okay, if that's what's going on with me, how many other people think this way? And I'm beginning to fear that this is that my approach is anomalous, that not many people have this style of thinking. And so the question I would like to put to this group here is, how well does this process-oriented style of thinking, how easily does it come to you? Do you find it alien, or this is just too weird for me, or, well, I can do a little bit of it, but it just doesn't come naturally?
Well,
go ahead.
I don't know. I think you remember stories, like the story of this general who made a war, blah, blah, blah. You remember, so it's a story that strikes you because you find it interesting. So you have high interest in it and you remember it.
Yeah.
And you tell it plenty of time. I'm sure you've told this story to different friends and, and so you remember it by repetition. And then for names, I think you remember the name of your dog or your friends or your family.
I've used it thousands of times.
Yeah.
Okay.
By repetition and by the emotional link to these persons that you frequent every day. You take your dog out every day and you have a connection with him or she, I don't know. And so I think it's not really related to because we don't think like computers, we are like more emotionally based, something like that, like a story based, I don't know. And so yeah, that's why. And so for you teaching process intensive thinking, I think you could replace process by maybe stories. I don't know.
Nas, you had a comment?
In my case, I also suck at remembering people's names, but for some reasons I have a very good sense of navigation, very good. Like if I been somewhere once, I can recognize my direction and how I can go from there. Like even if I go there 10 years later, if things didn't change drastically. I think maybe this could be that a lot of people like us maybe don't use their RAMs to save the data of such unimportant things as people's names in some case. And although I think there's a theory about this, that you don't forget anything. It's just in your subconsciousness, in your SSD somewhere, even if you cannot access it, even in your dreams or something, that data is never deleted, but you have to really drive and build the connection in your neurons to make a path there to be able to recall that information. And it's just something, as a person, I think I select to, I forget the word, filter that kind of information out. But when it comes to buildings, places I've been, it's very normal. Day-to-day life, do I think, in terms of processes, well, maybe not that deep as you do, but I think very visually. I imagine myself doing something, such as when I wake up, I'm directly going to the kitchen to make my coffee, and like when it brews, I'm in the toilet, like reading my news. And these are the stuff that just happens to me when I open my eyes. I'm like, you know, like missions to run. And if it's something like this, yeah, it's happening to me, but not maybe that deep into like programming stuff. Although I just recently start learning programming.
Okay. Well, Lorenzo and Naz have each raised an interesting point. Lorenzo, basically, or an observation from that is that stories have their own memory system. I'm sure you all remember, for example, Aesop's fables, the grasshopper and the ant. When was the last time you heard that story? 20 years when you were a young child, and yet everybody remembers it. We have very strong memory for some stories. And Naz raises the point of spatial memory, which in my case is also very strong. That is, no matter where I am, I almost always can sense, okay, that way is north, and here's how I go over here, and so forth. Actually, it was especially difficult. I've lived most of my life in California, where much of the time you can see mountains in the distance. And so I could always tell where I was just looking at the mountains, and it's easy. This was very difficult, however, when I lived in Nebraska. There are no mountains for hundreds of kilometers. And so whenever you looked around, you just saw trees and flatness. And it always just left me feeling a little uncertain, out of place, lost. So there's spatial thinking, which provides its own memory, and story thinking. And then, of course, as Lorenzo pointed out, the role of repetition in remembering certain common facts, names, whatever. But there's still this question of process thinking and how common or uncommon it is. Because again, I've spent decades trying to teach people about this stuff, and I just get the feeling I'm not getting very far with it. So now I would expect that this group would be stronger in process-oriented thinking than average. But still, I mean, can any of you comment on how for example, when I give the example of here's how we set up an equation for how somebody feels in response to somebody else's action, I'm sure you have seen me doing something like that. Does that seem too alien? How easily do you find yourself saying, ah, yes, I see, makes sense? Or do you end up feeling like, ooh, weird?
Like on memory, I think you can't. It's actually like normal and sane to forget stuff, because if you remember everything, it's a syndrome. It's
Yeah.
hypersemia, and so you suffer because you remember everything that occurred to you, and you can't do a hierarchy of memories or hierarchy of information.
Yeah.
So what I need to remember is I don't know. For me today is like I don't know the techniques of development of coding for my job. I need to remember the name of my friends. I need to learn my text in for the theater class tomorrow. You know, it's a hierarchy,
Yeah.
and for me it's important, because if I don't, like, if I forget how to do my job, I will have no more job. If I forget the name of my friends, I will have no more friends. But if I don't know anything about, let's say, the news, it will have little impact on my life. Except if there is a storm coming and I really don't watch TV and I'm not aware of the storm until it comes towards me. But so, yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to add this. So, yeah, I think memory is like there's like someone said, like human are like animals with a memory. Like we have we eat and we do all of the other things that animal does, territory, we fight and everything, except that we have memory, so we can learn and we can exchange with other people and we can build things because we can remember. I see my father, I don't know, hunt or make a fire or pick some fruits, and I remember which fruits to pick, how to do the thing, because I have memory. And it's not, we don't act only by instinct. We act by yeah.
Could I get some answer to the question about how easily this style of thinking comes? I mean, Sasha, Hannah, Felipe, can any of you comment on how easy it seems to you to be able to come up with these mathematical formulae in response to the social relationships? Felipe, you want to go ahead?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I've read about the object versus process-oriented thinking. And since I read that like a few months ago, I've been thinking about how that applies to me. And I figured that it's actually pretty difficult, at least for myself. I'd have to think of more examples. The only one that I can come up with right now is the one you mentioned about how we think about formulas, about human interactions, right? Like this statistic plus this means how this person will react upon this happening. I remember dedicating an entire weekend on trying to use Sweepweave, which is Sasha's application for story building that involves that kind of formulas. And I remember there being some kind of like threshold, I don't know how to explain, but kind of like a mental threshold that I had to go through so I could understand that better. I don't know if that answers your questions, but that's basically what I had to go through personally.
Okay. Sasha, can you comment on that?
I think part of the problem is with how the education system is run in, at least in the United States, because I I mentioned the book Free to Learn last month, and I'll go ahead and bring it up again. One of the things that he talks about is how different emotional states are connected to different styles of learning. Right now, the schooling system relies heavily on rote memorization, which is connected to fear and anxiety. And they place students in that frame of mind of going through, and they learn to think of learning as a process of, I'm afraid of failing this test, so I have to memorize things by rote. And they lose their ability to some extent to play and to learn through play. And to learn in a more positive frame of mind. And that's the kind of learning that is going to get you the process intensive thinking that you're talking about. When you're able, like, I think I have a relatively good ability to think in terms of process, but that's because I really wanted to make computer games as a kid and as a teenager. And so I sat down with different systems like Inform 7. I read a bunch of articles. I read your articles on Erasmus, and I learned it on, in my own time, in my own way, through, a self-directed process. I didn't go to school and have a teacher give me lectures until much later, regarding programming. I learned it myself because I wanted to. And so I learned it through a more playful, an experimental kind of way. Whereas if I had started off with a rote memorization thing first, then I think I would not have been able to do things nearly as well. I would have gone through and would have said, I have to remember, the specifics of how to do this in this particular language or something like that. And I think that the school system as it is training people to think the opposite way from how you're getting them to think. So you're one person trying to go against, a rather large system. And I think that's part of the problem here.
Naz, you had a comment?
I agree with Sasha. I suffer from ADS, and I suffered it through all my life, especially in high school. It was really hard for me to just apply the formulas that we were given, because we were supposed to memorize, because I could not memorize anything that did not make sense to me. So I had to have someone who had the capacity to explain me in a way that I can find it rational enough, so that I would remember, I would come to the equation by myself to remember in order to apply. So maybe that's what we are talking about. I just wanted to say that.
Okay. Sasha made a point about the role of play in learning, and that struck a chord with me, because in fact, much of my own learning was based on play. I remember a particularly interesting incident when I was in high school, and I was attempting, before I'd taken any physics courses, I was attempting to understand the nature of motion. And so I strung up a heavy lead fishing weight from a wire supported from very high. And then I would swing it around and watch it as it swung back and forth and try to understand what was going on. And I played with this pendulum, and I had lots of fun trying different combinations and variations. And I didn't learn anything formally, but I developed an intuition as to the nature of motion. by playing with it. And in fact, a great many other things I did that involved play. Another striking example is when I built a device. This was in 1972 that needed to generate random time. It needed to generate events at random times and randomly selecting one of 8 channels. And I built this crazy thing with ball bearings and a motor with a thing on it that would, it was like a pinball machine. The ball bearings would drop down and hit the thing with the motor, which would shoot them up, and they bounce around. And so they're all bouncing around, and there was a little hole at the top where occasionally at random times, one of the ball bearings would escape. And in fact, I tested it, and it was really good randomness. And then it would go down another ramp and then drop into what's called a Pascal's triangle, where it would drop and hit something and bounce back, and there was a nail, and it would fall directly onto the nail, and it was so positioned that it might go to the right or it might go to the left. And if it went to the right, there was another nail, and it might go to the right, might go to the left, and so on. And there were a bunch of these. And the end result was that the ball bearing would eventually end up in one of 8 channels. And that's where I made micro switches with 2 pieces of copper that were very close together. And when the thing rolled over them, it would push them together and make a switch. But this was a very playful solution to a problem. Nowadays, of course, we just use a computer with an Arduino with a random number generator, but back then that was not available. So yes, play has been an important part of my own educational process. And so perhaps that is play an important factor in process thinking. Here's another way. Let me push Hannah here. Could you please give some of your thoughts on how easy or difficult this process thinking comes to you?
I think you're making any programmer knows how to use process. So it's not that people can't understand process. There's another reason for you not succeeding with your thing. You're trying to be special and you're not.
So you're saying that process thinking comes easily to you, and you believe it comes easily?
Anyone who writes a game knows about process, and anyone who can code knows about it. It's nothing unusual.
Well, then the question is, why have I had such difficulty explaining these process approaches to social interaction?
Maybe it's the way you do it, or your personality or something. I don't know. I don't know you very well.
Okay. So, okay, that's a valid hypothesis. I've been trying for 30 years. I'm confident in my skills as a teacher, but I don't know. I think there's a real problem here. George? I'm sorry?
I think you don't have enough students. Problem is you're not in in, I don't know, a university or something where you have 200 students per year since 20 years. And so your ideas haven't got into the public yet, because it's only the way your information is diffused or I don't know, shared is through a really particular canal. Like I found you on your blog because a friend of me talk to me about you, and I did some research. I found your blog, read your articles, kept being interested in it, and found the class. But this is like a really long investment. It means that I'm already interested in your idea. If you want to touch a larger public, you need to go through the pain of selling it. Not through marketing, but like putting it into a way that is like it can, I don't know how to say it, but like needs to be like, you need to be recognized as some form of authority. So you have the acceptance of, like media, for example. I trust what I see on TV because it's given to me through a canal that is approved and something like that, you know?
Mr. Yin, you're a teacher, you have students. Can you comment on how easily or how difficult it is for them to absorb concepts related to process style thinking?
I think it really depends on the very diversity about the student's background. Because everyone has their own structure of knowledge. So you can't just put all your things into their brains. Even you talk the same thing in a class, but different students will absorb some part of your content in the class.
Yeah.
That's from my experience.
Like old education is like thinking of the student as a vase and pouring stuff in it, and it will absorb. And kind of a different approach would consider the student as a plant or a flower or something that you can take care of and put the good conditions, but you, I mean, yeah, I don't have the full story.
Maybe this different students have a different structure of knowledge who will just combine their own structure of knowledge with what you're talking about. Not just exactly what you're talking about. He will understand you're talking to content with their knowledge. You know, and I mean, so everyone will reconstruct your content into their structure of knowledge, into their brain. So even when you talk about the same thing, you know, in your class, but every student have every version of their own.
Yeah, a good example is I remember my class of coding, like pure coding. We're gonna do algorithm, everything. Really hard class. First week of class, and I'm like, I'm in the wrong school. I'm gonna die. You know. And next week is something else. Let's learn about Unity, how to make a game. Let's learn to learn. Let's. You want to do something, you type it in Google, you find a YouTube tutorial, you try. And for some students, the algorithm was understandable, and they had the mathematical background to understand it, to do the exercise in a really school way of doing it. For me, I wasn't able to do it because I didn't do math since 10 years ago. So yeah, like you said, you have some methods doesn't work for some people. So you need to have a multi-approach method. That's why usually you have several teachers.
Naz, you had a point you wanted to make?
I want actually, when you first asked this question, I also thought what Hannah said, but I didn't want to say it because I am kind. But I want to add maybe what you were missing, as my friends mentioned earlier, was a diverse feedback loop and a continuous diverse feedback loop. What part of your thinking has stuck with your students and what part did not even get into their filters. You could have learned this if you could share it with more people, and hopefully people who would give the feedback too, because you can share it, but getting feedback is always harder. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
George, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this whole issue of people having difficulty or not learning to think in process-intensive terms.
George?
I feel like if you made like $100 million on Lemort Artour, a lot of people use your system, Chris.
That's really
That's my 2 cents.
Oh dear. I agree with you. I have noticed on a number of occasions people commenting along the lines of, well, if Chris Crawford is right, why isn't he rich? And well, okay. Sasha, you have a comment.
Yeah. It occurs to me that a lot of computer games today are made by multiple people. You know, you have different people doing the programming and the writing of the story and the design of the story. And so even if we assume that programmers are frequently pretty good at thinking in terms of process, oftentimes they're not the ones doing the storytelling. You know, that's kind of a separate thing. And they're going to be trying to construct the game in such a way that non-programmers can write the dialogue and do all the storytelling and everything. So I think that people in this group are probably, you know, more likely to be part of smaller teams. So maybe we're exceptional cases, but I think regarding the whole hypothesis that, well, the programmers are already thinking in process intensive terms, that only solves the problem of applying process thinking to storytelling if it's the same people doing both jobs.
Okay, I'd like to raise a point here, that I will bring in, reformulate as a question. I'd like to tell 2 brief stories. The first concerns a realization I had while I was an undergraduate, and that concerns the physics of light scattering in the atmosphere. And one day, when I started to understand the process, I realized that the sky is blue for exactly the same reason that the sunset is red. In other words, the same process that makes the sky blue makes the sunset red. I found this idea, I felt like, oh, wow, that's really neat. I thought it was terribly clever and a wonderful idea, and it greatly pleased me. I'll tell another story about a realization that really impressed me. It has to do with the development of life on this planet, and a very difficult problem. The chemical reactions involved in getting life started are immensely complex, and they're done in a cycle. There are a variety of these chemical cycles that take place inside living systems. And one of the big objections to the scientific idea that life arose naturally is the fact, wait a minute, how could such a complex cycle ever develop naturally? And it's a valid objection. And somebody came up with an answer to it, which is absolutely brilliant. It's too complicated for me to explain, but it's a process-based explanation showing how, well, it didn't have to be this particular cycle. It could have been this cycle or this cycle. They basically demonstrated that there were billions of possible cycles, and life just happened to stumble upon this particular one by accident. And the process, they explained in detail exactly how this process would work. And when I finally came to understand it, I was absolutely beside myself with glee. It just, wow, what a wonderful idea. It's so clever, it's so brilliant. And the process involved here makes perfect sense, and it explains a mystery. I'll mention one more. I was reading a book about linguistics and the rise of the, in the Semitic languages, they have this really weird system where a word is defined by a short sequence of vowels and consonants, but then you change the consonants to get different forms of the word. And no other language has this system. It's, I mean, the Hebrew and Arabic, those languages all had this system. And he came up with an explanation of how it came to be. And it has to do with what's called linguistic compaction. For example, in English, we would say, I will buy some milk. But then we started to shift that to, I am going to buy some milk. And then that got compressed. Now it is compressed to, I'm gonna buy some milk. And then it became, I'm gonna buy some milk. And now it's compressed so far as, I'ma buy some milk. And basically he explained how this process happens in all languages. And then what happens is it gets so compressed that you can't figure it out anymore. I'm gonna buy some milk. And so they add something on top of it. I'm gonna go buy some milk, which is, I am going to go buy some milk, but it's, I'm gonna go buy milk. And he showed how this process in the Semitic languages would result in these consonants. And when I finally understood the process, again, it was like, wow, that's fabulous. What a clever idea. Here's my question to you. Do you experience this sense of glee when you understand a clever process, when some idea that is strange but is process intensive finally comes through to you? Do you have this sense of, oh, wow? Naz, that you've had that experience?
For sure. I love feeling that way, actually. And I'm a very curious person, so I question a lot of things. And when something can be explained to me, I'm in awe all the time. And I seek that feeling everywhere.
Anybody else? Can you mention experiences you've had like this?
Yeah,
I think I have an example. Oh, sorry. I think I
No, go
interrupted
ahead.
someone.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I had a quick example when I learned how actually ants can find their way to like leaf sources or like
Yeah.
sugar. I
Yeah.
think they use some sort of like pheromone
Yeah, they drop a
searching
scent.
thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's very interesting. And when I got it better was when I saw a video trying to simulate it. And that's what helped me understand it much better. I actually liked it so much that I convinced some friends to do a video game about it.
Ah,
And actually, like coding it made me understand it even further. And I think it's similar, right? Because you see how you place a leaf in an ant nest, let's say like driveway, and they can just circle around it. And you start to ask yourself, like, how these very simple insects can form such a complex like ecosystem. Uh, and you figure how this pheromone scent thing works, and you get kind of that aha moment.
yeah. George?
Oh, I was gonna say I remember popping champagne when I finally taught myself like how to do neural nets. I was so excited. I was so happy. But on the flip side, like some people don't want to know the process. I mean, a lot of people are very happy with magic and things just happening. They don't want to know how the car works. They don't want to know what a solenoid is or whatever. Like they don't like they want to go to the magic show. They don't want to become a magician. Like I think a lot of people are in that frame of mind. Like, no, this is all magic. My phone just works. No, Siri's just great. Like, let's.
Do these people become programmers? I mean, can you say?
They become middle managers of programmers. Yes. Yes, they do.
Life is cruel. So, well, let me ask, do you think all programmers do have a strong sense of process thinking?
No, it's a personality thing. Like, yeah, programmers that I know have kind of a similar personality. Not everyone, but two guys that I know from my school were like more introverts, really focused on work, really how do you say, could work for long hours, had difficulty to communicate, and were not really good with interpersonal relationships. So like high intensive work, but you have to balance it. Like, you know, like when you're making a character in an RPG, you can't have strengths in physical and also intellectual and also be a good diplomat, and you can't be good at everything. So personalities are like, you know, for example, I'm good at interpersonal skills, but my coding is a bit on the way down. But I'm still a developer because I can hack around. But I'm not happy when I code. You know, it doesn't make me click or.
Sasha, you have a comment?
There are matters of degree in thinking in terms of process, or thinking in terms of rote memorization or objects. I think a lot of times people think at the lowest level of abstraction they can get away with, which I try to understand things at a deeper level. But I think that a lot of the programmers understand, for example, they may understand Boolean logic really well, but they may not think much in terms of algebraic formula.
Yeah, I think you've hit on an important point here, but I would like to hear confirmation or rejection of this concept. Is mathematics the the dividing line? Is that what stops people from going very far into process-oriented thinking? Felipe?
Yeah, I was gonna add that I don't really think so, that math is that kind of divide, because I found that a lot of people, especially the one that I know from, like I have a lot of university colleagues that are from sociology and psychology classes, and I find that they can abstract a lot of experiences that they can like for example, they can understand that a lot of what we perceive that are like personal failures come from bigger systems that we can't really touch or see. And I don't think that's very related. And these people are mostly averse of math, and they find a way of thinking like that, you know, like for example, if I see uh, let me find a good example. Like for example, finding a homeless person in the street. I think that, for example, someone that has studied sociology, they can find that they are not in that situation because of personal failures, and it can be because of like systemic failures of like government decisions, stuff like that. I don't know how related it is, but people with high sociological imagination, I think they can think in processes too.
Okay, let me mention, I have been working for a month now on my next video, which is about how to use mathematics to creatively express ideas. And I will actually start shooting and putting that video together during January, and I will try to have it ready before the next seminar. And if I think it's good enough, I'll suggest that video provide a good starting topic for discussion next month. My fear is that you guys will come back and say, oh yeah, that's everybody knows that. So we shall see. Let's see, any other comments here?
On the process thing, Chris, I feel like yeah, all programmers, you know, have some sort of process oriented thinking, but it's like you have to get this storytelling thing, you have to both have that thinking and understand how like a conversation works. And a lot of programmers in my experience have trouble, you know, with normal social interactions, you know,
Yes.
or saying hello to strangers, right?
Yes.
Which is a big part of a storytelling game, is saying hello to somebody you don't know and shit like that. I don't know.
Certainly.
There's an overlap of skills required here, which is very specific, and an overlap of interests, which kind of like bring that circle of people down.
Yes, certainly. I think we can all agree that as a group, the average programmer is definitely weak on social intelligence.
Yeah.
And I've known a few exceptions, and they are really striking people.
But they're striking because they're exceptions, right?
Yes, yes.
They're the exceptions proving the rule. That's like, oh, wow, what is this?
Yeah, exactly. So perhaps there is an issue. We require the conjunction of two radically different forms of intelligence.
And university now is not university. It's not the uni knowledge of learning everything. Like you can get a PhD and not take propositional logic. You can not be able to do proper grammar and have a PhD in like mouse reproduction.
Yeah.
You know, so the specialization and lack of philosophical thinking or linguistics and all of that. I mean, it's all compounding into this problem you're seeing.
Yeah. Specialization is dramatically changing the nature of academic society. So, okay.
There's something about that could explain why we have still the same people making games or programs. It's of socialization in school. where, and in society in general, where, for example, my sister is an engineer, computer engineer, and in the school there was like 2% of women, because we don't push women towards computers, and maybe also they are not really interested in it. I don't know. And the way computers are made is the only way we can make it. I don't know. Could we make a language that is not complicated? Like, for example, the way a program works could be made like with no with a good UI, or with a UI of Adobe Photoshop, for example. And you can go through the UI of Adobe Photoshop and make images, or you could just say, this is not for me, too complicated, I don't want to interact with this. Yeah, I think there is something about the fact that, yeah, the way it's built makes it so
Well,
complicated.
Certainly, one of the reasons we have been bemoaning the fact that there are so few women in technical fields for many years, that I remember in the mid 1970s at the university where I was, they developed a special program called Women in Engineering, whose sole purpose was to help train women who had already had a bachelor's degree in the life sciences to become electrical engineers. My wife was in that group, and that group has now gone through its careers, and these people are retiring now. But my impression is that it is not so much discrimination, that is, we hate women, get them out of here. It's more that the people in engineering fields are so dumb when it comes to social relationships that they want to be nice, and they say, oh, wow, to a woman, wow, you have such an interesting nose, it's so big. And they don't realize, that might hurt her feelings. It's more like the men are always stepping on the toes of the women without realizing it. So that's Naz, you seem to agree. You want to go ahead and comment here?
You're literally just saying what I wanted to say. In fact, I'm actually writing a manifesto about this and the work culture in IT industries and game industries and virtual reality and XR to publish on my website right now on this topic, why I don't want to be working with with most of the people, most of the organizations in the future. I want to work in smaller organizations because I care so much about interpersonal communication, and I believe people who can actually understand me, they need to take the time to understand me and my needs as a woman, maybe not as a woman, but as a person who's trying to get into this industry, who are simply just different, not only by gender, but also as a person of color, to make myself feel comfortable and safe in this environment. And I think this is what is lacking in these industries. In fact, most of the early computer programmers were women, even before the graphical interfaces added to the computing systems. So it's not because it's hard. In fact, it's because it's hard. Women can do it better, in my opinion. But the problem is that the work culture is very toxic for us. And we just simply don't want to be in a place where we are already starting from, if not one step, way more steps down to get to the same level as men. It's just this norms of the society, the industry societies is just too toxic for us. And in fact, if you want to help me write my manifesto, I would really love to have your opinions on it. I will send you an email about it later.
You got my email address?
Yeah.
Okay, send me whatever, and I'll be
Yeah.
happy to comment. Or Felipe, you had a comment.
Oh yeah, I had something quick to add that a lot of times, I completely agree to what you said, that a lot of times if women are discriminated in the industry, it's not because of some blind, like primitive hate towards women, right? They're definitely discriminated, but it's in ways that we don't really even notice. And
Yes.
I've been guilty of this myself. I have a perfect example for this. I was all this big, like, oh, advocating, like, oh, why are there so few women in STEM, in science and technology and engineering? And I noticed that I was doing this myself. For example, in the same like semester that I was supposedly advocating for this, right? I remember that I was in a group project with another two people, right? With a man and a woman. And I realized that without even noticing, we gave the woman a secretary place in our team, right? So this is something that I noticed that happens a lot. And you don't really notice it until you think about it. So for example, every like project, a programming project, has mostly two parts: making the actual program, and then the documentation and making the paper and writing about it, right? And I noticed that a lot of times when I was in a group like with another man and a woman, we always got the woman to write about it instead of actually, getting into the code itself. And I just couldn't believe it when I noticed that I was doing that, myself. A lot of times, even the women themselves get in this secretary, like say, position without they even noticing.
Yeah.
Because they are so because I don't know, like there's a lot of behaviors that happen around us that we don't even notice if we are part of, of that discrimination process. So I found that very interesting.
I'd like to tell a story about an issue here that, or a factor at work here. In my opinion, the two primary factors here are: one, male lack of emotional intelligence, causing the men to step on the toes of the women inadvertently, and they do it all the time. But there is another factor here. I'm gonna say we can blame women for this or whatever. Here's the story. About 20 years ago, I was on a NASA airborne mission where we were going to be observing meteors, and we were on this airplane, and the setup of the airplane was that there were seats facing each other with a table in between, and then the window was right over the table. And I was doing one experiment, and I had my computer and equipment in front of me, and across from me was an undergraduate woman from MIT, very bright, who'd gotten this summer scholarship thing to participate. And she had an experiment that was assigned to her by the principal investigator, the boss, and he had told her, I was working, and he came by and said, now this is how I want you to set up the equipment, have the camera facing this way and blah, blah, blah. And he told her how to do it. So she set the whole thing up while we were on the ground, getting everything set up and checking it out. And at a certain point, it was obvious that the system wasn't going to work, that what she was building couldn't work because this thing bumped into that thing and pushed it aside and so forth. And she tried everything to make it work and she couldn't. And then she came up with an idea, and she rearranged it and came up with an arrangement that worked. And then about 10 minutes later, the boss came through and he looked at it and he said, this isn't the way I told you to set it up. I want you to do it this way and this way and this way. Now, she simply said, yes, sir, and went ahead and set it up his way so that it wouldn't work. Now, if she had been a male, she would have said, no, that doesn't work. this is why it doesn't work. And my idea is better than your idea. But being a woman, she wants to make peace with everybody, cooperate and so forth. And so she did it the way it was told, so it wouldn't work. I have seen this type of behavior among women in technical fields. They try too hard to cooperate. There are times when you simply have to say, I'm right, you're wrong. And that's really hard for a woman to do. So, and men do it all the time. And so when you put a man and a woman on the same team, guess what's going to happen? The man is just going to stomp the woman. And it's just a problem with human nature. I have seen all female teams, and they do fairly good work. Unfortunately, the ones I've seen just happen to have bad luck and didn't quite work out. I'd love to see one that really worked well, but we are way over time here. So I better close this off, and I won't be able to participate in the Discord discussion, but is it possible to record that, Naz?
If someone can do it, why not? It's just I have a very shitty internet, so.
Okay.
But I will promise I will not be one of those ladies. Like,
Good.
in my team, I'll be the right one.
Good. Well, in fact,
Unless they're more right than I am, then I take my position.
well, for example, my wife had a very successful career as a manager. She ended up getting an MBA. She ended up running a major unit of a, in fact, here, I'm going to show you a picture. There we go. I'm going to, let's see, will this, here is a photograph. Wait, no, that's not how it works.
Maybe you can screen share it.
Can you, I've never seen how to screen share on Zoom. Can somebody teach me?
Sure, I got you. First, okay, there's a green button underneath that says share screen.
Oh,
And you
I see
have
what you're saying. Okay, let me okay, share screen. There we go. Here's a photograph from our wedding. This is my wife responding to somebody who said something inappropriate at our wedding, and this is how she reacted. This woman takes no shit from nobody, and that's why she has been very successful in her career. She stands up to people, and so she's been a very successful woman. But I will point out that I mean, that's one reason why I fell in love with her. She's not at all like a you know, a normal everyday submissive woman. So anyway, but yeah, I need to close this off. So thank you all. Have fun on your continuing discussion where you can finally discuss things that I've suppressed or whatever. And I will see you guys next month.
Mr. Crawford, please send my love to your wives. To your wife. Sorry. I look up to her.
Okay. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Later,
Bye.
Chris.
Goodbye.